Hello, everybody. Jordan here, the PH is Silent, with a wonderful, excellent guest, Mr. Seiben, from the Magic the Gathering universe. Worlds are colliding right now. Seiben, what is your channel? What do you do?
Hey guys, so yeah, my name is Seiben. My YouTube channel is called the Aether Hub. I've been making Magic the Gathering related lore content for the past 6 or so years.
Love lore.
Strictly focused on MTGs, my favorite game in general. So I'm bringing a lot of that multiversal knowledge today.
Yes, this is great. So we found each other because similar, like similar ideas, like D&D lore, Magic the Gathering lore, and it's like we want to know the whole picture. And you were like, let's do it. Let's make a video. So we're going to talk about this card or this just crossover event because Dungeons and Dragons is getting. I mean, it makes sense. Wizards of the Coast has both of these properties. They're going to do something with it. And Dungeons and Dragons got a Ravnica book, a Theros book. We're going to get a Strixhaven book. But now we are in the mess of, not mess, I should say, but like the large, the big merging of things. And we're going to have the Forgotten Realm, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms cards for Magic the Gathering. It's all very exciting.
Oh,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Like,
very exciting.
How do you feel about this card set, I guess I should say? Because I haven't played Magic since high school, college.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was like 15 years ago. So that was a long time.
Yeah, okay.
And I casually played. I think I had a friend that was really into it, and I was like, oh, this is a little too expensive for 2005 really poor Jordan, so we're going to not do this.
Welcome to the world of TCGs.
Yeah.
It's an expensive hobby for sure.
But fun. And I'm a big collector, and I like collecting things. So when these came out, I'm like, I don't play, but I really want all of these cards. Like, I would love to have the whole collection and put it on a wall or something.
Oh man, yeah, I've seen some amazing like artwork done with Magic the Gathering cards. But to get to your question, how do I feel about the Magic the Gathering Dungeons and Dragons crossover, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms? There's a lot of controversy on this set. Okay, so maybe I should take a step back. I shouldn't be so dramatic. It's not really a controversy. There's a big debate on whether or not this is a popular set right now. It just came out, so a lot of opinions are still being formed right now. But there is a consensus that it's a much weaker set for Magic the Gathering that players aren't really used to. A lot of people don't understand that this Dungeons and Dragons crossover set isn't a part of the yearly makeup for the premier sets for Magic the Gathering. This is almost like a bridge set. What used to be like the Magic core sets.
And is
MTG.
core set like for competitiveness? Like you're like these are legal cards or.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where they can tweak the metagame just a little bit. That doesn't introduce too much power, but answers some questions that have popped up in the standard metagame. So it's not really designed to push the envelope when it comes to power so much as it is to correct some mistakes, so to speak. So that's why a lot of players don't like them too much. They feel like it takes up a spot in their yearly card,
right.
amount of money they can allot.
That's funny because I think D&D fans do the same thing where they'll announce a Magic the Gathering book and people get upset where they're like, well, it's not Dark Sun again, or it's not Planescape, which are these classic settings from the early 90s that people want a 5th edition version of, but and it's always like, no, if they want to, and I don't know, I'm of the opinion that if they want to make those, they will make them. It's not like they're throwing darts and they're like, oh, we got another Magic the Gathering setting, guys. We can't make Dark Sun again. Sorry. Like, you know.
Yeah. Hey, nostalgia runs rampant in Magic the Gathering, too. Everyone wants to go back to the old planes. Everyone wants to see the old villains arrive again. So, hey, we're no strangers to nostalgia hunting over in here either. But personally, when it comes to Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, I'm what the community terms as a Vorthos, someone who cares about the story, the lore, design, and the flavor of cards. So me being a big old nerd for all things fantasy related, there could not be a better crossover expansion for me personally than this one.
That's cool.
You know, combining Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering, which is just two of the pinnacles of nerdom for me, things that I just like can obsess over story wise. Is just like a match made in heaven. And I feel like a lot of people on the Vorthos side of things, if they can get into D&D lore as well, feel the same way.
Yeah, that's cool. And so with This is a question where I just kind of feel dumb because I don't know about it. But in Dungeons and Dragons, we have adventures, and
Yeah.
up to a point, we had novels. How does Magic the Gathering convey the lore? Like, where does the story come from?
So you're opening a can of worms with that question alone. Magic the Gathering storytelling has evolved and de-evolved and then evolved again several times over its history. I know when I first started getting into the lore back in high school, it was based around these weekly online articles that were released.
Okay.
So every Magic the Gathering set would have its own story to go with it, its own characters, and sometimes they weren't even connected to an overarching story. It was a story specific for that plane, specific for that set, and then when it was over, it was done. But they released these articles for free online, and you could just read them. It was pretty cool. But I know before then, they had full-length novels written for the story of Magic the Gathering. Like, we're talking about a full-on story arc, trilogies of novels written for the older lore of MTG. It actually reminds me a lot of the older, like, D&D novels.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
So it was kind of written in the same style.
Yeah, because you get an author that's like, hey, we haven't explored this part of the Forgotten Realms. Go tell a story there, and then they would kind of have carte blanche to tell whatever story they wanted to and said part of the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah,
so.
And I think Magic the Gathering and D&D have both experimented a lot in their medium of storytelling. Because Magic the Gathering has done novels, it's done comic books, it's done video games, it's done free online articles. Most recently, they had a Diablo-style RPG game that didn't last a year. It didn't last a year. They shut down the servers, but they gave it a go. They gave it a go, and they have a Netflix series that they're cooking up right now. I haven't heard anything about it for 2 years, but supposedly it's still in the works. I heard that there's a D&D related series maybe floating around there
Yeah,
too.
there's talk like an Amazon series or something, and animated from what I heard. And I think they want to capitalize on the Critical Role success that raised $1 million Kickstarter to do an animated series of their D&D campaign. So I think there's lots of people in the business now that are just like, like. And so, you start contacting the head honchos like Wizards of the Coast, and you're like, well, what's this D&D thing? Do you have any characters we can make a TV show about? But it's all, hypothetical. I haven't heard definite anything, but yeah.
Yeah, it's same for the Magic the Gathering Netflix show. Haven't heard much about it, but they say they're making it. We'll see. But yeah, they actually went from novel to online article, back to novels, until there was a massive lore flop with a very, very high budget novel series that they had written. It was supposed to be the pinnacle of the Magic the Gathering storyline, like a 10-year, over a decade-long storyline, finally coming to an epic
the Avengers
conclusion.
Endgame of Magic the Gathering.
It was exactly that. You have no idea the parallels that has right there. But it did not perform very well. So they retreated back a little bit to the online articles until we get to Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, where technically speaking, there are no story connections and there's no online articles, but instead we have these short campaign adventures to tie in.
Yeah, I made a video the other day because I found those for the first time and was like reading them, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And that's where, so Wizards, I'm backing up a little bit. Wizards has said that this set is not part of Magic the Gathering as a whole. So it's like the Forgotten Realms is not part of Magic the Gathering. But from the other side, I was looking at it going, but I think with these adventures, you're basically saying Magic the Gathering planes can be part of D&D. And so it's weird because you would think if you had one, it would also mean the other, but not necessarily because they're different properties.
I have dabbled a little bit with like the adventure guides for Theros, for example. So I've looked into those. I have them basically for research purposes. I wanted to learn more about like the lore and the world building of Theros, and I thought that could provide a different perspective. I haven't really looked into the ones for D&D quite yet. Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
But those are like, if I'm going to try and find a quote unquote lore of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms to bring outside of just specific characters, that is where I would go. But currently, I'm not running any campaigns. I'm not involved in any campaigns, so I don't even know how to start with these adventure guides.
Yeah. Well, they're interesting. There's only 2, and I assume there's going to be 5 total.
I believe so. Yeah.
And the villain is a man who was, his mother was born, and these are spoilers, I guess, if you guys don't want to know this, but like the villain is his mother came from Ravnica somehow, and married
Oh.
and is a wizard and was teaching these wizards a new type of magic. And then with that, she married a Faerunian man, and they had a child. He died under mysterious circumstances, and she took the baby back to Ravnica. They raised him. He got married, had another kid, and their child is the villain, the grandson of that lady. So he had a troubled life. We don't really know the full story, which we'll get later as more things come back. But he somehow came back to the Forgotten Realms and is seeking these powerful magical items. And you're kind of always following on his coattails. But he has a book that has like these 5 symbols on it, and it's all very blatantly like, here are the 5 type colors of mana. And I think I found a disc that had like a white sun on it and stuff like that. Or I didn't find, I was reading. But you get the idea.
Yeah.
So that this whole thing, anyway, I don't know where it's gonna go, but I'm very curious. And then my next question for you though actually is, would you consider that villain a planeswalker? Like, what makes a planeswalker?
Yeah, so 100% what you described to me, like his mother or grandmother or him, all of them going from plane to plane, that's the definition of a planeswalker. The evolution of what a planeswalker is has changed a lot in MTG history. Back when the game was first founded, before even Planeswalker cards existed in the game itself, Planeswalkers were hyper powerful characters. Like, they were gods. They could do anything they wanted. Like, as long as they had enough mana, they could create worlds. They could resurrect the dead. Like, just universe breaking things. And then there was a big event known as the Great Mending, which is essentially Wizards' soft reset saying, okay, Planeswalker's too OP. We're going to nerf them a little bit in the story. And thus, they can travel to different worlds, but their magic is basically that of any other mage. You know, they could be just as strong as any other mage out there. They have a couple special unique abilities, but outside of that, they're no stronger than an average mage, outside of the fact that they can just move between the Blind Eternities. You know, the space between space, essentially. So,
Okay, so
anyone who...
That's
go ahead.
that's a good question, because I wanted to bring that up. Like, how are the realms separated then? I shouldn't say realm. How are the planes separated then?
So it's never really described how the multiverse is set up. They use descriptive words like, this is a far-flung plane, or this plane is separated by, you know, or it's like super far away. They just give like descriptive words that describe that a plane is somehow in space further away than something else, which to me reads like it's almost like our universe, you know, how we have Earth and there's planets that are further away from us and all this kind of stuff. But in reality, planes are almost like different realities. And to traverse the multiverse means that you leave one reality and enter a different reality. There's no saying that, there's no indication that you can hop in a rocket ship from Ravnica and fly off to Theros, you know? So I would have to say they're like different. They're like pocket dimensions almost.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Are there boundaries? Are they all infinite, or is it like, oh no, this one is like literally a fishbowl, and you swim around in the water inside? I don't know.
So yeah, every plane is almost like, it's like a planet.
Okay.
So you can say that it's not like a different reality where that plane also has a universe and a star and everything like that. Some could argue that like a plane like Theros, obviously it has stars in the sky. It has, you know, spatial objects, but mostly it's like an encapsulated planet, so to speak.
Okay, cool. Planeswalkers going from one plane to another. You mentioned that there is like an in-between. What is that in-between?
Yeah, so the in-between is known as the Blind Eternities. Again, this is something that's left very ambiguous. We don't really know much about it. The way it's described to us makes people infer that this is like deep space. It's a realm of nothingness. There's no air, there's no matter, there's just basically endless nothingness. The only known creatures that inhabit the Blind Eternities are these monsters known as the Eldrazi. These are gigantic, almost like Galactus level world-eating monsters. They go from plane to plane, devouring the mana of that world until it's devoid of life and crumbles away. Um, so the Eldrazi are creatures of the Blind Eternity. They are colorless mana,
Are
and
they
they devour worlds.
Cthulhu, Lovecraftian kind of weird
Oh,
horrors? Or?
incredibly! Okay,
Okay.
you hit the nail there. It's like it's their most Lovecraftian beings
Yeah.
in Magic the Gathering.
Okay.
They're tentacles,
Mm-hmm.
they're space octopi, they're all that kind of stuff that you can think of in Lovecraftian terms. They're all of that.
So a planeswalker, do they cast a shell on them, or do they bypass this somehow? Like, do they
They
actually traverse it, or?
yeah, they physically traverse it like again,
Well,
this is something
magically,
it's
physically,
never
but like.
yeah. It's not like they physically walk out of the plane, but their essence is broken down and it transports through the Blind Eternity and ends up on a different plane. Again, this is something that is not really talked about. It's not really explored and not really given much detail into.
Yeah.
But a lot of planeswalkers that like planeswalk for the very first time, their experience is written pretty detailed about what they feel and how they feel like they're being ripped out from like their soul is being ripped from their body and they're being torn through space. Almost like they're flattened in a sense. So, if you ever watched old physics documentaries about, black holes or something like that, and the idea that if you get close to a black hole, you don't get crushed, but you get stretched thin and thin and thin.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's sort of like that. If I want to put a real world parallel to it, that's the best I can say.
That's interesting. Yeah, man. So who are some of the famous planeswalkers? And then we were talking earlier about like they were basically gods back in the day.
Yep.
Are these planeswalkers? Could they typically be gods? Like if you went to the right planet and the planeswalker made that because he had an infinite source of mana or something.
Yep.
Does he have more power in that plane as opposed to another plane? Like if he leaves that?
So after the mending, where all the planeswalkers got nerfed, there are no more godlike planeswalkers.
Okay.
Although that hasn't been an issue for some of them because some of them are still out there trying to seek that power. So any planeswalker who was born after the mending obviously has nerfed powers, but we do have a couple of what we describe as old walkers, who are planeswalkers who were alive before the mending, so they know what godlike power is, and some of them are going through great lengths to get that power back. That was the apex story for a lot of Magic the Gathering's modern storytelling, was following this dragon planeswalker named Nicol Bolas as he ventures throughout, causing schemes and disrupting planes to get this, his machination to become a god again, and it kind of all ended in that before mentioned book that fell kind of flat to the audience.
Okay.
But that was the culmination of 10 years of schemes from this dragon planeswalker who was seeking his godhood back.
Interesting. Okay, so planeswalkers are not necessarily human or elf either. Like you could have dragons and other entities can be like basically if you're a planeswalker, you're traversing planes. Makes sense.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah. A planeswalker is defined by what is called a planeswalker spark. A planeswalker spark is like the innate ability to become a planeswalker, and you're either born with it or you're not. You can't just become a planeswalker if you study hard enough.
Okay.
You're basically born one or you're not, and a planeswalker spark has to ignite for you to become a planeswalker. And that usually happens as a result of some traumatic experience, going through a painful or super emotional trauma. That usually triggers one's planeswalker spark, and they get to planeswalk away from to safety, essentially. It's almost like an instinct, an internal instinct to survive. A lot of these planeswalkers, if you go back and read their origins, their sparks ignite at a moment where they're just about to die. Or something, or they find out some great horrible truth that they weren't prepared for, and then their sparks ignite and they get whisked away, almost like a fight or flight kind of mechanism.
So they watch Krillin die and they become Super Saiyan, and then they're a planeswalker.
Exactly.
So.
Honestly, that does it for everybody.
That's true. I changed my life totally over. So what is the significance of this set? in Magic the Gathering. Like, I know we were kind of talking that Magic the Gathering, or Wizards of the Coast said that this is not a, like, canonical kind of thing, whereas other sets have been. But what are the impacts for this, I guess, on the Magic the Gathering community, or lore-wise, I should say?
Okay, so you know what? We can actually talk about how it impacts not only just the lore, but the player base in general, because it's pretty clear what Wizards of the Coast was trying to do here. Yeah, they said it's not canon, but just from your description of the adventure, it's obviously they're putting a lot of Magic the Gathering into D&D.
Yes.
They may not want to take D&D and put it into Magic the Gathering. They don't want Faerun to be a canonical plane that Magic the Gathering characters can go to, and that's completely fine. But it's clear to see that MTG is going to be an ever-growing part of a D&D kind of expanding multiverse, And that's not to say that D&D is strictly going to have like these Magic the Gathering characters there, but rather D&D is like, and you can probably speak to this a little bit better than I can, it's a place for you to craft your own adventure. You don't need to strictly abide to some laid out campaign necessarily. So if they introduce MTG assets to D&D, it's basically just giving you guys the tool to do whatever you want with it, right?
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Yeah,
Magic the Gathering, it can't really do that because it's a card game that's telling a story through the cards themselves. If they were to bring the D&D over, they would be just carbon copy canonical characters. Players can't really make their own adventure with Magic the Gathering stories so much as they can with D&D. We have way more maybe like fanfic kind of stories that involve those worlds, but obviously those aren't canonical. So I think it's just it's a lot more natural to include MTG locations and themes in D&D than vice versa.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's like the real takeaway here is to explore and expose MTG players with D&D and with D&D players to MTG. They're a company and they're trying to make as a broad appealing game as possible. So, hey, we're all nerds, we're all playing in the same establishment pretty much. So why not dip our toes into something else?
Over there on the left side of the table. Do you want to come over to the right side of the we can hang
exactly.
Out. So, no, I will say like it's worked on me because the art has been really cool to see all of these really iconic characters from the Forgotten Realms, and they have just like these like that Lolth picture of her like holding someone all wrapped up in spider webs and stuff. I was just like, that's amazing. And then I saw that one of the Drist pieces of art sold for like an absurd amount of money. Yeah, and so it's really crazy. Oh no, your lights!
Oh my goodness, what happened here? My lights are on. I think my camera's exposure.
Oh, your camera exposure went down. Okay. Well, really quick then, where can people find you? I mean, obviously I'll link all of your social stuff down below, but for those of you who need a reminder later on, where can people find you?
Well, if you can find me in the darkness that has enveloped me, I can be found on YouTube. My YouTube channel is Aether Hub. You can also follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is actually Seiben Lore, so you can follow me on Twitter there. I say funny things and link cards from time to time.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, and again, all of the links down below, and you should definitely go subscribe to Seiben's channel because you might see me, and we might talk about some D&D lore. So,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming out, sir. I really, really appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for having me.